Flight attendant denied black teen first class, not knowing her mom owns the airline. I'm sorry, but you need to return to your assigned seat in economy. First class is for paying customers only. Oh, I understand completely. But I think there's been a misunderstanding that my mother, Diana Wilson, would be very interested to hear about. The flight attendant, Barbara Collins, stood rigid in the narrow aisle of the Boeing 747, her perfectly manicured hand gripping the back of seat 2A where 16-year-old Zoe Wilson had settled in. The cabin buzzed with the low murmur of first-class passengers watching the confrontation unfold. Barbara's lips pressed into a thin line, her blue eyes narrowing as she stared down at the young black teenager who remained perfectly calm, hands folded in her lap. "I don't care who your mother is," Barbara said, her voice carrying just enough to make several passengers look up from their pre-flight routines. "Your boarding pass clearly shows economy seating. This seat belongs to someone else." Zoe slowly reached into the pocket of her simple denim jacket and pulled out her phone. "Would you like to speak with the CEO of Wilson Airlines yourself? I can call her right now." Barbara's face flushed as a distinguished older gentleman across the aisle leaned forward. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "Did you say Wilson, as in Diana Wilson?" The tension in the cabin thickened as more passengers turned to watch. Barbara's hand trembled slightly against the leather seat. "Security," she called over her shoulder, never taking her eyes off Zoe. "We have a situation in first class, but let's go back to how this all started. It was just 3 hours earlier when Zoe Wilson woke up in her bedroom in the family's Chicago lakefront home. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Zoe's bedroom as her alarm clock, an old-fashioned one that had belonged to her grandmother, rang with insistent clarity. Zoe reached out and silenced it, then lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling. Today was the day. After months of planning and preparation, she was finally going to surprise her mother at the company's Seattle headquarters. Zoe Wilson had just turned 16 last month. Unlike many teenagers from wealthy families, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that belied her years. Her mother, Diana Wilson, had raised her alone after Zoe's father died when she was just 7. Diana had built Wilson Airlines from a regional carrier into one of the country's most respected airlines, all while making sure her daughter understood the value of hard work and humility. "Good morning, Miss Zoe," came a warm voice from the doorway. Harold Jenkins, the family's household manager for the past 20 years, stood with a breakfast tray. At 68, Harold's hair had gone completely white, but his posture remained military straight, a remnant of his years in the Air Force. "Morning, Harold," Zoe said, sitting up and smiling. "You didn't have to bring breakfast up." "On such an important day, of course I did." Harold placed the tray on her lap. "Your favorite blueberry pancakes, just like your father used to make." Zoe's smile softened at the mention of her father. "Mom always says his pancakes were the reason she married him." "Among other fine qualities," Harold said with a twinkle in his eye. "Now your flight leaves at noon. The car will be ready at 9:30 sharp. I've already packed your suitcase according to your list." "Thanks, Harold. I don't know what we'd do without you." Harold nodded, pleased. "Your mother called while you were sleeping. She asked about you." "What did you tell her?" Zoe asked, suddenly alert. "Just that you were spending the weekend at Mia's house working on your history project. She seemed to accept it." Zoe relaxed. "Perfect. She has no idea I'm flying out to surprise her for the board meeting tomorrow." "It's a thoughtful gesture," Harold said, "especially with the 20th anniversary of the airline coming up." "I found Dad's original business plan in the attic last month," Zoe said, excitement creeping into her voice. "It's all handwritten. Mom doesn't even know it exists. I'm going to give it to her after her presentation." Harold nodded approvingly. "She'll be touched. Your father would be very proud of both of you." After finishing her breakfast, Zoe showered and dressed simply in jeans, a white button-up shirt, and her favorite denim jacket, the one with patches from all the places she'd visited with her mother. She kept her curly black hair natural, pulled back with a simple headband, and wore minimal makeup. Diana had always taught her that confidence came from within, not from designer labels or cosmetics. In her bedroom mirror, Zoe saw her father's eyes looking back at her, warm brown with flecks of gold around the pupils. People always said she had his eyes and her mother's determination. "Miss Zoe," Harold called from downstairs, "it's time to leave if you want to arrive with plenty of time to spare." "Coming," Zoe called back. She grabbed her backpack, took one last look around her room, and headed downstairs. Harold was waiting by the front door, Zoe's suitcase at his feet. "Now you have everything, boarding pass, ID, phone, charger." "Yes to all 3, Zoe said, patting her pockets. "An emergency credit card, though I won't need it." Harold nodded, satisfied. "And you'll text me when you land." The minute we touch down, Zoe promised. She gave the older man a quick hug. Thanks for helping me pull this off. My pleasure. Your mother works too hard. She deserves this surprise. The car ride to O'Hare International Airport was smooth, the driver navigating through late morning traffic with practiced ease. Zoe gazed out the window, watching Chicago's skyline recede in the distance. She'd made this trip countless times with her mother, but never alone. There was something exciting about traveling by herself, even if she was flying on her mother's airline. At the airport, Zoe thanked the driver and headed into Terminal 3. The Wilson Airlines check-in counters were easy to spot, their distinctive blue and silver logo prominent above the sleek modern desks. Zoe had deliberately booked her flight online, using her own credit card rather than her mother's corporate account. She wanted the surprise to be complete. The check-in agent smiled professionally as Zoe approached. Good morning, welcome to Wilson Airlines. How may I help you today? I'd like to check in for the noon flight to Seattle, Zoe said, sliding her ID across the counter. The agent typed on her computer, then looked at Zoe's ID more carefully. Wilson, any relation to the Wilson Airlines family? Zoe had prepared for this question. It's a common name, she said with a smile that neither confirmed nor denied. The agent seemed to accept this and continued processing her check-in. You're in seat 27C, an aisle seat in economy. Would you like to check any bags today? Just this one, please, Zoe said, lifting her suitcase onto the scale. Perfect, that's checked through to Seattle. The agent tagged the bag and handed Zoe her boarding pass. We're boarding at 11:30 from gate G14. Have a pleasant flight, Ms. Wilson. Zoe made her way through security without incident. With time to spare, she stopped at a bookstore to pick up the latest mystery novel from her favorite author. Her mother had introduced her to Barbara Johnson's books when she was 14, and they often discussed the plots during their rare quiet evenings together. At the gate, Zoe found a seat away from the main crowd and pulled out her phone. She had a text from Mia, her best friend who was covering for her this weekend. Operation Surprise CEO is a go, the text read. Zoe smiled and typed back. Taking off soon, remember if Mom calls you. I know. You're in the shower or helping my mom with dinner. Got it covered. Take pics. Zoe put her phone away as the gate agent announced pre-boarding. She watched as first-class passengers lined up, many of them business travelers in suits with briefcases and laptops. Her mother usually flew first class when traveling for work, but had taught Zoe that economy was perfectly comfortable for personal travel. It's important to understand the experience of all our passengers, Diana often said. As boarding continued, Zoe joined the line for her group. The flight attendants at the door greeted each passenger with professional smiles. One of them, an older woman with perfectly coiffed blonde hair and a name tag reading Barbara Collins, checked Zoe's boarding pass. Seat 27C down the aisle to your left, Barbara said, already looking past Zoe to the next passenger. Zoe made her way down the aisle, navigating around passengers storing luggage and finding seats. Economy was filling up quickly with a mix of families, solo travelers, and the occasional business person. She found her seat, stowed her backpack underneath, and settled in. As she waited for boarding to complete, Zoe thought about her plan once she reached Seattle. She'd take a taxi directly to the Wilson Airlines headquarters downtown. According to Harold, who had discreetly checked her mother's schedule, Diana would be in meetings until 6 p.m. Zoe planned to arrive around 5:30 and wait in her mother's office. Her executive assistant, Martin, was in on the surprise and had promised to let her in. The middle seat next to Zoe remained empty as boarding continued, but eventually an elderly woman made her way down the aisle. She paused at Zoe's row. I believe I'm in the middle seat here, she said, her voice warm and slightly breathless from the walk down the plane. Zoe stood immediately to let her in. Of course, let me help you with your bag. Thank you, dear, the woman said, handing Zoe a small carry-on. These overheads seem to get higher every year. Zoe smiled and easily lifted the bag into the compartment above. There you go, all set. The woman settled into her seat with a grateful sigh. She was in her 70s, with silver hair cut in a stylish bob and kind eyes behind fashionable glasses. I'm Alina Bridges, she said, offering her hand to Zoe. Zoe Wilson, Zoe replied, shaking Alina's hand. Nice to meet you. Wilson, like the airline? Alina asked, glancing around the cabin. Zoe hesitated, then nodded slightly. Yes, but I'd appreciate if we could keep that between us. Alina's eyes twinkled with understanding. Your secret is safe with me, dear. I worked in corporate America for 40 years, IBM, during the golden years of computing. I understand the value of traveling incognito. Thank you, Zoe said, relieved. Are you headed to Seattle for business or pleasure? A bit of both, Alina replied. My son and his family live there, but I'm also attending a technology conference. I may be retired, but I like to keep up with the industry. Their conversation was interrupted as the flight attendants began their safety demonstration. Zoe watched attentively, another habit her mother had instilled in her. Always respect the safety procedures, Diana would say. They're there for a reason. As the plane pushed back from the gate, Zoe felt the familiar excitement of takeoff. She loved flying, had loved it even before her mother bought the small regional airline that would become Wilson Airlines. Some of her earliest memories were of sitting beside her father in a tiny four-seater plane, his voice calm in her headset as he explained how the controls worked. The plane taxied to the runway, engines humming with restrained power. Beside her, Alina gripped the armrests tightly. Not a fan of takeoff. Zoe asked gently. Alina gave a small laugh. Even after all these years, this part still makes me nervous. My late husband was a pilot in Vietnam. He used to say takeoff and landing were the only parts that mattered, everything else was just sitting in a chair in the sky. That's a good way to put it, Zoe said. My dad was a pilot too. The engines roared as the plane accelerated down the runway. Zoe felt the familiar push against her seat, then the slight lift as the wheels left the ground. She always loved this moment, the transition from earth to sky. Once they reached cruising altitude, the seatbelt sign dinged off, and the cabin crew began their service. Barbara Collins, the flight attendant who had checked Zoe's boarding pass, moved efficiently through first class with a tray of welcome drinks. From her economy seat, Zoe could just see into the front cabin, where passengers were already settling in with blankets and amenity kits. Would you like something to drink? Asked another flight attendant who had reached their row. Just water for me, please, Zoe replied. The same, said Alina. As the flight attendant moved on, Alina turned to Zoe. So tell me about yourself, Zoe Wilson. What takes you to Seattle today? Zoe found herself warming to the older woman. There was something grandmotherly about Alina that invited confidence. I'm surprising my mother. She's giving an important presentation tomorrow and she doesn't know I'm coming. How wonderful. Alina's face lit up. There's nothing like a good surprise, and she works for the airline, I presume? Zoe nodded, deciding to trust Alina with the full truth. She's the CEO, Diana Wilson. Alina's eyes widened slightly. My goodness, I've read about her in Business Week. Didn't she take over the company after her husband passed away? Yes, Zoe said softly. My dad died when I was 7. He and Mom started the airline together, but it was just a small regional carrier then. Mom built it into what it is today. That's quite an accomplishment, Alina said. And now you're following in their footsteps? Zoe shrugged. Maybe. I love flying and I love the business side too. Mom makes sure I understand how everything works. Every summer since I was 12, I've worked in a different department, customer service, scheduling, maintenance. This year it was accounting. Smart woman, your mother, Alina nodded approvingly. Nothing beats hands-on experience. Their conversation continued pleasantly as the flight progressed. Alina shared stories about her days at IBM during the 1970s and 80s, when women in technology were rare. Your mother and I would have a lot to talk about, Alina said. Breaking into male-dominated industries, balancing career and family. It wasn't easy then, and from what my granddaughters tell me, it's still not easy now. Zoe thought about her mother's late nights and early mornings, the missed school plays and parent-teacher conferences that were rescheduled around board meetings and investor calls. But she also remembered how Diana always made time for what truly mattered, being there when Zoe was sick, never missing a birthday, their special Sunday brunches when they talked about everything and nothing. Mom always says that balance isn't about equal time, it's about equal presence, Zoe said. When she's with me, she's fully with me, Alina nodded. Wise words. Now if you'll excuse me, I think I'll close my eyes for a bit. These cross-country flights aren't as easy on these old bones as they used to be. As Alina dozed beside her, Zoe pulled out her book but found herself unable to focus on the story. Instead, her mind wandered to the surprise she had planned. The original business plan had been her father's dream, written in his neat engineer's handwriting on yellow legal pad paper. Her mother had mentioned once that the original document had been lost in their move to a larger house when the airline began to expand. Finding it in an old box in the attic had felt like a sign. About halfway through the flight, Zoe decided to use the restroom. As she made her way forward, she noticed that one of the lavatories in economy had an occupied sign. Rather than wait in the aisle, she continued forward, thinking to use one of the first-class restrooms that appeared to be vacant. As she approached the dividing curtain between economy and first class, Barbara Collins stepped into her path. Excuse me, Barbara said, her voice polite but firm. The first-class lavatories are for first-class passengers only. There's another lavatory at the rear of the plane. Zoe was taken aback by the abruptness of the statement but nodded politely. Of course, sorry about that. As she turned to head toward the back, she overheard Barbara speaking to another flight attendant. Economy passengers are always trying to sneak into first class, as if we can't tell the difference. The comment stung more than it should have. Zoe knew she didn't look like someone who could afford a first-class ticket in her simple jeans and denim jacket, but the assumption grated on her nevertheless. When she returned to her seat, Alina was awake and reading a magazine. "Everything all right, dear? You look bothered." Zoe shook her head. "It's nothing, just a small misunderstanding." Alina gave her a knowing look. "People can be quick to judge based on appearances. I've had my share of that over the years." "It doesn't usually bother me," Zoe admitted, "but sometimes I wonder what would happen if people knew who I was. Would they treat me differently?" "Almost certainly," Alina said matter-of-factly. "People treat you differently when they think you have money or power. The trick is knowing who treats you the same either way. Those are the people worth keeping in your life." Zoe nodded, thinking about her best friend Mia, who had been in her life since kindergarten. Mia knew exactly who Zoe's family was and had never cared one bit. She treated the Wilson mansion the same way she treated her own modest home, as just another place where people lived. As the flight continued, Zoe tried to return to her book, but the encounter with Barbara had left her feeling unsettled. She had been raised not to make a fuss about her family's status, to treat everyone with respect regardless of their position. She wondered briefly if she should have said something, then dismissed the thought. It wasn't worth making a scene. The flight attendants came through with the meal service, offering a choice between chicken and pasta. Zoe chose the pasta, which turned out to be surprisingly good for airplane food. Alina selected the chicken and seemed to enjoy it as well. "I remember when they served full meals on china plates, even in economy," Alina remarked, "with real silverware and cloth napkins. Of course, that was before airline deregulation changed everything." "My mother has been trying to bring some of that back," Zoe said. "She believes that good service doesn't have to be limited to premium cabins. Small touches can make a big difference." "A philosophy more businesses should adopt," Alina agreed. "Your mother sounds like a remarkable woman." "She is," Zoe said simply. After the meal service, Zoe felt her eyelids growing heavy. The excitement of the trip and the early morning start were catching up with her. She reclined her seat slightly and closed her eyes, drifting off to the gentle hum of the engines. She woke to Alina gently touching her arm. "We're starting our descent, dear. The captain just announced it." Zoe straightened her seat and looked out the window. Below them, the landscape was changing from the browns and greens of rural Washington to the more densely populated areas surrounding Seattle. In the distance, she could see the distinctive shape of Mount Rainier, its snow-capped peak rising majestically above the clouds. "It's beautiful," she murmured. "Indeed it is," Alina agreed. "I never tire of this view, no matter how many times I fly in." The descent continued smoothly, the plane banking gently as it lined up with the runway at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. Zoe felt the familiar sensation of her ears popping as the cabin pressure adjusted. The landing gear lowered with a reassuring thunk. As they made their final approach, Zoe thought about what lay ahead. Her mother's surprise, the presentation of her father's original business plan, perhaps a nice dinner together before they flew back to Chicago on Sunday. Diana's schedule was always packed, but she would make time once she knew Zoe was there. The plane touched down with barely a bump, evidence of the pilot's skill. As they taxied to the gate, the familiar announcement came over the PA system. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. Local time is 2:15 p.m. and the temperature is 65 degrees. Please remain seated with your seatbelt fastened until the captain turns off the fasten seatbelt sign." The announcement continued, but Zoe's attention was drawn to the flight attendants preparing for arrival. Barbara Collins was checking the first-class cabin, ensuring seat backs were upright and tray tables stowed. She moved with practiced efficiency, her perfect appearance unmarred by the 4-hour flight. When the plane reached the gate and the seatbelt sign dinged off, the usual rush to stand began. Zoe remained seated, knowing from experience that there was no point in joining the crush in the aisle. Alina seemed to share this philosophy, making no move to rise. "No rush," Alina said with a smile. "My son isn't expecting me for another hour. He thinks my flight lands at 3:30. "You're surprising him too?" Zoe asked. "Not intentionally. He just has a terrible memory for schedules. Rather than correct him, I thought I'd have a nice cup of coffee at the terminal and enjoy some people watching." Zoe laughed. "I like your style." The cabin slowly emptied, first-class passengers exiting first, followed by the orderly progression from front to back in economy. When it was finally their turn to leave, Zoe helped Alina retrieve her bag from the overhead bin. "Thank you for the lovely conversation," Alina said as they made their way up the aisle. "It made the flight go much faster." "It was my pleasure," Zoe replied sincerely. "Good luck with your conference." "And good luck with your surprise," Alina said with a warm smile. "Your mother is a fortunate woman to have such a thoughtful daughter." They parted ways in the terminal, Alina heading toward the coffee shop while Zoe made her way to baggage claim. As she waited for her suitcase, Zoe checked her phone and sent a quick text to Harold. "Landed safely, all going according to plan." His reply came almost immediately. "Excellent, your mother called again, all clear on this end. Good luck." Zoe smiled and pocketed her phone. So far, so good. Her suitcase appeared on the carousel, and she grabbed it, then headed outside to the taxi stand. The Seattle air was cool and slightly damp, a pleasant change from Chicago's early summer heat. The taxi driver was chatty, pointing out landmarks as they made their way from the airport to downtown Seattle. Zoe responded politely, but her mind was already at Wilson Airlines headquarters, imagining her mother's surprise when she walked into her office. The Wilson Airlines building was one of the newer additions to Seattle's skyline, a gleaming tower of glass and steel with the company's blue and silver logo prominently displayed near the top. The taxi pulled up to the main entrance, and Zoe paid the fare, adding a generous tip. The security guard in the lobby looked up as she approached, his expression professional but curious. Most 16-year-olds didn't walk into corporate headquarters alone on a Friday afternoon. "May I help you?" he asked. "Yes, I'm here to see Martin Chen in the executive suite," Zoe said confidently. The guard checked his computer. "Your name, miss?" "Zoe Wilson." The guard's expression changed slightly, recognition followed by a careful neutrality. "One moment, please." He picked up his phone and dialed an extension. "Mr. Chen, there's a Zoe Wilson here to see you." He listened for a moment, then nodded. "I'll send her right up." He turned back to Zoe. "Mr. Chen will meet you at the executive elevator. It's down that hallway, last door on the right." "Thank you," Zoe said, picking up her suitcase. The executive elevator required a key card for access, which was why Martin needed to meet her. As she approached, the door opened, and Martin Chen stepped out, a broad smile on his face. "Zoe, you made it." Martin had been her mother's executive assistant for the past 5 years. His early 30s, impeccably dressed and incredibly efficient, he was Diana's right hand and one of the few people who could tell the CEO when she was making a mistake. "Hi, Martin," Zoe said, returning his smile. "Is everything set?" "Perfectly." Martin ushered her into the elevator and used his keycard to access the executive floor. "Your mother is in a budget meeting that should wrap up in about 20 minutes. Then she has a short break before her final meeting of the day at 5:30. So I'll have time to surprise her between meetings? Perfect." "I've cleared her schedule for dinner too," Martin added with a conspiratorial wink. "Told her it was an important client meeting that couldn't be rescheduled. She wasn't happy, but she agreed." "You're the best, Martin." "I know," he said with mock seriousness. "It's a burden being this good." The elevator doors opened directly into the executive suite. The reception area was elegantly appointed with comfortable seating, artwork featuring historic aircraft, and a wall of awards and recognitions that Wilson Airlines had accumulated over the years. "Let's get you settled in your mother's office," Martin said, leading the way past his desk to a set of double doors. He opened them to reveal a spacious corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows offering spectacular views of Seattle, and in the distance, Puget Sound. Diana Wilson's office reflected her personality, elegant but practical. Her desk was large but not ostentatious, with 3 computer monitors arranged in a semicircle. One wall featured photographs chronicling the airline's growth, while another displayed family photos, mostly of Zoe at various ages, but also a few of Thomas Wilson, Zoe's father, in his pilot's uniform standing proudly beside a small propeller plane. "Make yourself comfortable," Martin said. "Can I get you anything?" "Water, soda, coffee." "Water would be great, thanks," Zoe replied, setting her suitcase beside a leather sofa. While Martin went to fetch her water, Zoe moved to the wall of family photos. Her fingers traced the frame of one showing her parents on their wedding day, Diana radiant in a simple white dress, Thomas handsome in his dress uniform. They looked so young, so full of dreams. Another photo showed the 3 of them in the cockpit of a small aircraft, Zoe barely 5 years old, sitting on her father's lap, tiny hands on the controls, her mother looking on with a proud smile. That had been her first flying lesson, her father letting her feel the response of the plane to the gentlest touch of the controls. "Here you go," Martin said, returning with a bottle of water. "Your mother should be done soon." The budget meetings usually end early because no one wants to argue with her about numbers. Zoe laughed. Mom always knows her numbers better than anyone else in the room. Exactly. Which reminds me, she's been working on her presentation for tomorrow all week. It's the 20th anniversary strategy announcement, and she wants it to be perfect. That's part of why I'm here, Zoe said, reaching into her backpack and carefully removing a folder. I found something I think will mean a lot to her. Martin raised an eyebrow curiously, but before he could ask, his phone buzzed. He checked it quickly. The budget meeting is wrapping up. Your mother will be here in about 5 minutes. He glanced around the office, then at Zoe. How do you want to do this? Zoe thought for a moment. I'll sit in her chair. When she comes in, you keep her talking for just a second before she notices me. Classic, Martin nodded approvingly. I'll head back to my desk then. Good luck. After Martin left, Zoe took a deep breath and settled into her mother's chair, turning it to face the window so her back would be to the door when Diana entered. The folder containing her father's business plan rested in her lap. She felt a flutter of nervous excitement in her stomach. A few minutes later, she heard voices approaching, Martin's and then her mother's distinctive tone, confident and clear. The revised projections for the third quarter on your desk, Martin was saying. And don't forget you have that client dinner at 7. Remind me who it's with again? Diana's voice came from just outside the office. It's a surprise, Martin replied smoothly. But trust me, it's someone you'll definitely want to meet. The door opened and Zoe held her breath, keeping the chair facing the window. A surprise client. Martin, you know I don't like. Zoe slowly swiveled the chair around, a smile spreading across her face as she met her mother's shocked expression. Surprise, she said softly. Diana Wilson stood frozen in the doorway, briefcase in one hand, phone in the other. At 45, she was still strikingly beautiful, her dark hair cut in a sleek bob that framed her face perfectly. She wore a tailored navy suit that Zoe recognized as one of her favorites for important meetings. For a moment, Diana seemed unable to process what she was seeing. Then her face transformed, joy replacing shock as she dropped her briefcase and rushed forward. Zoe. What on earth, how did you? She pulled Zoe up from the chair and into a tight embrace. Over her mother's shoulder, Zoe saw Martin give her a thumbs up before quietly closing the office door to give them privacy. How are you here? Diana asked, finally releasing Zoe but keeping her hands on her shoulders as if to make sure she was real. You're supposed to be at Mia's working on your history project. I lied, Zoe admitted with a grin. With Harold's help and Martin's. Conspirators, all of you, Diana shook her head, but she was smiling broadly. But why? Not that I'm not thrilled to see you, sweetheart, but is everything okay? Everything's perfect, Zoe assured her. I wanted to surprise you before your big presentation tomorrow, and she held up the folder. I found something I thought you should have. Diana looked at the folder with curiosity. What's this? Open it, Zoe urged. Diana took the folder and carefully opened it. Inside was a stack of yellow legal pad pages covered in familiar handwriting. Her hand went to her mouth as she recognized what she was seeing. Is this Dad's original business plan? Zoe confirmed softly. The one you thought was lost in the move. I found it in an old box in the attic last month. Diana's eyes filled with tears as she gently touched the pages. I can't believe you found this, she whispered. I looked for it for years after. She didn't finish the sentence, but Zoe knew she meant after her father's death. Read the first page, Zoe encouraged. Diana carefully turned to the first sheet where Thomas had written in bold letters across the top. Wilson Airways, where everyone belongs in the sky. Below was a mission statement that began, to create an airline where every passenger, regardless of their background or means, feels valued, respected, and welcome. A tear slipped down Diana's cheek. He always said the sky was the great equalizer, that once you were up there, it didn't matter who you were on the ground. That's why I wanted you to have this before your anniversary presentation tomorrow, Zoe explained. To remind you of where it all started, of Dad's vision. Diana hugged the folder to her chest, then reached out with one arm to pull Zoe close again. This is the most thoughtful gift anyone has ever given me. Thank you, sweetheart. They stayed like that for a long moment, both thinking of the man who had brought them together, whose dream they were still carrying forward. Finally, Diana pulled back, wiping her eyes and smiling. Well, this calls for a celebration. Martin said something about dinner reservations. At 7, Zoe confirmed. He wouldn't tell me where, though. Knowing Martin, it will be somewhere perfect, Diana said. But that gives us some time first. Let me finish up my last meeting, and then we can head to the hotel so you can freshen up before dinner. Sounds good, Zoe agreed. I'll wait here while you finish your meeting. Diana looked at her watch. It shouldn't take more than an hour. Make yourself at home, you know where everything is. With another quick hug, Diana left for her meeting, taking the folder with her father's business plan. Zoe settled on the office sofa and pulled out her book, but found herself instead looking around the office, thinking about how her mother had built upon her father's vision. The wall of awards told the story of Wilson Airlines' growth, from a small regional carrier to a national airline known for its customer service and innovative approach. Diana had been at the forefront of several industry changes, from being one of the first airlines to eliminate change fees to implementing a more transparent pricing structure. But what Zoe was most proud of was her mother's commitment to creating a diverse workforce at all levels of the company. Wilson Airlines had one of the highest percentages of women and people of color in leadership positions in the industry. Diana often said that diverse perspectives led to better decision-making, which in turn led to better service for their diverse passengers. Zoe's thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Martin poked his head in. "Your mother just texted me. Her meeting is running longer than expected. She suggests you head to the hotel and she'll meet you there as soon as she's done." "Okay," Zoe said, gathering her things. "Which hotel am I staying at?" "The Fairmont Olympic," Martin replied. "Your mother keeps a suite there for when she's working late. I've already arranged for your suitcase to be taken up. Here's the key card." He handed her a hotel key in a small paper folder. "Your mother should be there by 6:30 at the latest. Thanks, Martin, for everything." "My pleasure. It's not often I get to be part of a good surprise around here. Usually surprises in this office involve stock prices dropping or competitors launching new routes." Zoe laughed. "Well, I hope this was a better kind of surprise." "Definitely. You should have seen your mother's face when she realized it was you in her chair. Priceless." Zoe took a taxi from the Wilson Airlines headquarters to the Fairmont Olympic Hotel, an elegant historic building in the heart of downtown Seattle. The doorman greeted her warmly, and the front desk staff was equally welcoming when she presented her key card. "Ah, Ms. Wilson, welcome to the Fairmont Olympic. Your suitcase has already been delivered to the suite. Is there anything else you need?" "No, thank you," Zoe replied. "Everything's perfect." The suite was on the top floor with views overlooking the city. It was elegantly appointed with a separate bedroom, living room, and a small dining area. Zoe found her suitcase waiting in the bedroom as promised. She took a quick shower to freshen up after the flight, then changed into a simple but elegant navy blue dress, one of her mother's favorites. She was just finishing touching up her makeup when she heard the suite door open. "Zoe," Deanna called, "in the bedroom, Mom, be right out." When Zoe emerged, she found her mother had changed as well into a stylish charcoal pantsuit with a deep red blouse. Diana smiled warmly at the sight of her daughter. "You look beautiful, sweetheart." "Thanks, Mom, so do you." Diana held up the folder with Thomas's business plan. "I've been thinking about this all through my meeting. It's given me some ideas for tomorrow's presentation, but more than that." Her voice softened. "It's brought your father back to me in a way I didn't expect, seeing his handwriting, his thoughts on paper." Zoe nodded, understanding. "I felt the same way when I found it, like he was right there with me." Diana checked her watch. "We should head down. Martin made reservations at Canley's, one of the best restaurants in Seattle, with a view almost as spectacular as the one from my office." Dinner at Canley's was indeed spectacular. Their table overlooked Lake Union, the city lights reflecting on the water as evening fell. The food was exquisite, but even better was the time together, uninterrupted by phone calls or meetings. Diana asked about school, Zoe's friends, her plans for the summer. Zoe shared stories about her classes, particularly her advanced business course where she was at the top of the class. They laughed together about Zoe's recent disastrous attempt to learn tennis. "I have many talents, Mom, but hand-eye coordination is not one of them." And Diana's newfound interest in gardening, which had resulted in an abundance of zucchini that neither of them particularly liked. As dessert was served, a delicate chocolate souffle that they shared, Diana grew more serious. "I've been thinking about the anniversary announcement tomorrow," she said. "Reading your father's original business plan reminded me of something important that I think we've started to lose sight of." "What's that?" Zoe asked. "His emphasis on treating every passenger with the same respect, regardless of what they paid for their ticket." Diana took a sip of her coffee. "We've been focusing so much on upgrading our first-class service to compete with international carriers that I think we've started to create too much separation between the cabins." Zoe thought about her experience on the flight, about Barbara Collins' comment about economy passengers trying to sneak into first class. "I had an interesting experience on the flight here," she said slowly. "One of the flight attendants stopped me from using a first-class bathroom, even though the one in economy was occupied. She made a comment afterward about economy passengers always trying to use first-class facilities." Diana frowned. That's exactly the kind of attitude your father wanted to avoid. Who was this flight attendant? Do you remember her name? Barbara Collins, Zoe said. To be fair, she was just following policy, I'm sure, but it was her tone that bothered me, the assumption that someone in my clothes wouldn't belong in first class. Barbara Collins, Diana repeated, making a mental note. I'll look into it. Not to get her in trouble, she added, seeing Zoe's concerned expression, but because it might be indicative of a larger issue we need to address. What are you thinking for the announcement tomorrow? Zoe asked. I was going to focus on our expansion plans, new routes, fleet upgrades, that sort of thing. But now I'm thinking we should also recommit to your father's original vision, a renewed emphasis on treating all passengers with equal dignity, regardless of ticket class. Zoe smiled. Dad would love that. After dinner, they returned to the hotel, both tired but happy. They decided to watch a movie together, an old favorite, The Princess Bride, that they had watched countless times with Thomas when Zoe was little. Halfway through the movie, Diana's phone buzzed. She checked it with a slight frown. It's Martin. There's an issue with tomorrow's presentation materials. He sent them to my email for review. Go ahead, Zoe encouraged. I know the movie by heart anyway. Diana retrieved her laptop and began reviewing the presentation while Zoe continued watching the movie. After a while, Zoe glanced over to see her mother making notes, completely absorbed in her work. It was a familiar sight. Diana's ability to focus was legendary in the industry. Everything okay? Zoe asked during a quiet moment in the film. Diana looked up, seeming slightly surprised to be pulled back to the present. Yes, just some last-minute adjustments to the slides, actually. She turned the laptop toward Zoe. What do you think? I've added a slide about recommitting to your father's original vision. Zoe looked at the slide, which featured a quote from Thomas's business plan, where everyone belongs in the sky. Below it, Diana had outlined a new initiative to enhance the economy class experience without raising fares. I love it, Zoe said. It's perfect. Diana smiled, satisfied. Good, I think it's the right direction. She closed her laptop. Now, let's finish this movie. I want to see the grandfather say, as you wish, one more time. The next morning, they enjoyed breakfast in the hotel restaurant before heading to Wilson Airlines headquarters for Diana's presentation. The company had rented a large conference space in the building for the event, as it would be attended by all Seattle-based employees, board members, and key investors. As they entered through a side door, Diana was immediately approached by Martin, tablet in hand, ready to go over last-minute details. Everything's set, he assured her. The board members are all here, press is in the designated area, and we've got a live stream for employees at other locations. Perfect, Diana said, slipping easily into CEO mode. Zoe, would you like to watch from the front row or from backstage? Front row, Zoe decided. I want to see everyone's reactions. Martin led Zoe to a reserved seat in the front, directly facing the podium. The room was filling rapidly, a buzz of anticipation in the air. On large screens at either side of the stage, the Wilson Airlines logo rotated slowly, along with the words celebrating 20 years of excellence. At precisely 10 a.m., the lights dimmed slightly, and the company's CFO, James Thornton, took the stage to introduce Diana. James had been with the company almost from the beginning, one of Diana's first hires after she took over following Thomas's death. Ladies and gentlemen, James began, his deep voice carrying easily through the room. It is my great pleasure to introduce the woman who has guided Wilson Airlines from a small regional carrier to one of the most respected airlines in the country. A woman of vision, determination, and unwavering commitment to excellence. Our CEO and president, Diana Wilson. Applause filled the room as Diana strode onto the stage, confident and poised in a tailored blue suit that matched the company colors. She took her place at the podium, waiting for the applause to die down before speaking. Thank you, James, and thank you all for being here today as we celebrate 20 years of Wilson Airlines. She began by recounting the early days of the airline, how she and Thomas had started with just 2 planes and a dream. She spoke movingly of taking over after his death, of the challenges and triumphs along the way. Then she turned to the future, outlining expansion plans, fleet modernization, and technology improvements. But it was when she reached the slide about recommitting to Thomas's vision that her voice took on a special resonance. Last night, she said, I was reminded of something important, something fundamental to who we are as a company. She glanced at Zoe in the front row. My daughter found her father's original business plan for Wilson Airways, as he called it then, and at the very top of the first page was this phrase, where everyone belongs in the sky. Diana paused, letting the words sink in. Thomas believed that the sky was the great equalizer, that once you were up there, it didn't matter who you were on the ground. Everyone deserved to be treated with the same respect, the same dignity, regardless of whether they were flying first class or economy. She looked around the room, making eye contact with board members and employees alike. Somewhere along the way, I fear we may have lost sight of that vision. In our effort to compete, to offer premium services and amenities, we've perhaps created too much separation between different classes of service. Zoe saw a few board members shift uncomfortably in their seats, but Diana continued confidently. Today, as we celebrate our 20th anniversary, I want to announce a new initiative. We're calling it One Sky. It's a recommitment to treating every passenger with equal dignity and respect, regardless of their ticket class. She outlined the initiative: investments in improving economy seating comfort without raising fares, standardizing customer service training across all cabins, revisiting policies that created unnecessary distinctions between passengers. This doesn't mean eliminating first class or premium services, Diana clarified. It means ensuring that every passenger feels valued from the moment they book their ticket to the moment they retrieve their luggage at their destination. The presentation concluded with a video montage of Wilson Airlines history, from the first small propeller planes to the modern fleet of today. The final image was a photograph of Thomas Wilson standing beside one of those first planes, smiling broadly at the camera. As the lights came up, the room erupted in applause. Diana stepped away from the podium, acknowledging the response with a gracious nod. James returned to the stage to announce that there would be a reception immediately following in the adjacent room. Diana made her way off the stage and directly to Zoe, who stood to embrace her. "That was amazing, Mom. Thank you, sweetheart, for everything." Diana kept an arm around Zoe's shoulders as they were approached by board members and executives offering congratulations. The reception was in full swing when Diana's phone rang. She checked the caller ID and frowned slightly. "It's operations. I should take this." She stepped away to take the call, leaving Zoe chatting with James Thornton, the CFO, who had known her since she was a little girl and always had a kind word for her. When Diana returned a few minutes later, her expression was troubled. "There's a situation with our flight back to Chicago this afternoon. Mechanical issues with the scheduled aircraft. They're having to substitute a smaller plane, which means some passengers will need to be rebooked." "Is there anything you can do?" Zoe asked. "I've asked them to look at all options, but it's complicated. The smaller plane has fewer first-class seats, which means some passengers will need to be downgraded or moved to a later flight." Diana checked her watch. "Our flight isn't until 4 p.m. Hopefully they'll have it sorted by then." They returned to the reception, but Diana was distracted, checking her phone frequently for updates. Finally, around noon, she received a text that seemed to reassure her. "Operations says they've resolved the issue. We should be fine for our flight." She put her phone away and smiled at Zoe. "Now, let's enjoy the rest of the reception, and then perhaps we can do a little sightseeing before we head to the airport. The Space Needle, maybe?" The afternoon passed pleasantly. They visited the Space Needle, enjoying the spectacular views from the observation deck. Diana pointed out landmarks: the Wilson Airlines headquarters, the route planes took when landing at SeaTac, the house where she and Thomas had lived when they first moved to Seattle to establish the airline. By 2 p.m., they were in a car heading to the airport, Diana having insisted on being early, just in case there are any lingering issues from the aircraft swap. At the airport, they bypassed the regular check-in counters, Diana leading Zoe to a discreet door marked Wilson Airlines Executive Access. Inside was a small, elegantly appointed room with a single desk staffed by a professionally dressed woman who stood immediately upon seeing Diana. "Ms. Wilson, we weren't expecting you to use this entrance. It's an honor." "Hello, Rebecca," Diana replied warmly. "This is my daughter, Zoe. We're on the 4 p.m. flight to Chicago." "Of course." "Let me check you in right away." Rebecca typed rapidly on her computer. "I see you're both in first class, seats 1A and 1B. Actually," Diana said, "I'd like to make a change. Could you put us in economy, please, preferably in the exit row if it's available?" Rebecca looked startled but recovered quickly. "Of course, Ms. Wilson, let me see what's available." After a moment, she said, "I can offer you seats 16A and 16B. It's the exit row." "Perfect," Diana said. "Thank you." As they left the executive check-in with their new boarding passes, Zoe gave her mother a curious look. "Economy, is this because of your announcement today?" Diana smiled. "Partly, but it's also because I realized I haven't flown economy on my own airline in over a year. If I'm going to talk about One Sky, I should experience what our economy passengers experience." Security was a breeze with their priority access, and soon they were walking through the terminal toward their gate. As they passed airport shops and restaurants, several employees recognized Diana, nodding respectfully or offering a quick greeting. At the gate, the flight was already beginning to board. Diana and Zoe stood back, watching the process. First-class passengers were boarding, including an elegantly dressed elderly woman who Zoe recognized with surprise. "Mom, that's Alina Bridges. She sat next to me on the flight here." Diana watched as Alina showed her boarding pass to the gate agent. "Would you like to say hello?" "Yes, let's," Zoe agreed. They approached Alina just as she was about to enter the jetway. "Ms. Bridges," Zoe called. Alina turned, her face lighting up with recognition. "Zoe, how lovely to see you again." Her eyes shifted to Diana and a look of understanding crossed her face. "And you must be Diana Wilson. It's a pleasure to meet you." "The pleasure is mine," Diana replied, shaking Alina's hand. "Zoe tells me you had a nice conversation on the flight out." "Indeed we did. You have a remarkable daughter, Ms. Wilson, very poised and thoughtful for her age." Diana smiled proudly. "Thank you, I think so too, but I'm biased." "Are you both on this flight back to Chicago?" Alina asked. "We are," Zoe confirmed. "But we're in economy this time, seats 16A and B." Alina raised an eyebrow. "Is that so? Well, I look forward to perhaps continuing our conversation during the flight." With a friendly nod, Alina continued down the jetway to board the plane. Diana and Zoe returned to the waiting area, standing off to one side as boarding continued. "She seems lovely," Diana commented. "She is," Zoe agreed. "She worked at IBM during the 70s and 80s. She had some interesting stories about being a woman in technology back then." "I can imagine," Diana said. "It couldn't have been easy." As they watched the boarding process, Zoe noticed Barbara Collins, the flight attendant from her outbound flight, standing at the door checking boarding passes. She nudged her mother. "That's the flight attendant I told you about, Barbara Collins." Diana observed Barbara for a moment, noting her efficient but somewhat impersonal manner with the boarding passengers. "I see. Well, this should be interesting." When their boarding group was called, Diana and Zoe joined the line. As they reached the gate, Barbara took their boarding passes, giving them a cursory glance before looking up with a practiced smile. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Wilson," she said, then did a double take as she recognized the CEO. "Ms. Wilson, I didn't realize you were on this flight." "Last-minute arrangement," Diana said pleasantly. "This is my daughter, Zoe. I believe you two met on a flight yesterday." Barbara's eyes widened as she looked at Zoe, recognition dawning. "Yes, of course. Welcome aboard, both of you." Her professional demeanor returned quickly. "You're in seats 16A and B, the exit row. Enjoy your flight." As they made their way down the jetway, Zoe whispered to her mother, "She didn't seem to recognize me." "She probably sees hundreds of passengers a day," Diana replied. "And you were in economy, not making a fuss. Easy to overlook." The aircraft was the smaller substitute that operations had mentioned, a Boeing 737 instead of the scheduled 777. It was nearly full, passengers settling into their seats as Diana and Zoe made their way down the aisle to row 16. Their seats were comfortable enough, with extra legroom due to being in the exit row. Diana took the window, Zoe the aisle. As they stowed their carry-ons and settled in, Zoe noticed several passengers doing double takes as they recognized the CEO sitting in economy. The boarding process continued smoothly. As it neared completion, Barbara Collins moved through the cabin, checking that seatbelts were fastened and carry-ons properly stowed. When she reached row 16, she paused. "Can I get you anything before takeoff, Ms. Wilson?" she asked, her tone notably more solicitous than it had been at the gate. "No, thank you, Barbara," Diana replied. "We're quite comfortable." Barbara moved on, but Zoe noticed her speaking quietly to another flight attendant and gesturing subtly in their direction. The other flight attendant glanced their way, surprise evident on her face. "I think word is spreading that you're on board," Zoe murmured to her mother. "It's fine," Diana said. "I fly often enough that it's not usually a big deal, though usually in first class," she admitted with a small smile. The flight departed on time, the takeoff smooth and uneventful. Once they reached cruising altitude, the flight attendants began their service. Barbara was working first class, while two other attendants handled the economy cabin. The economy service was efficient if not luxurious, a choice of beverages and a small package of pretzels. Diana accepted a cup of coffee, while Zoe opted for apple juice. They settled in for the flight, Diana reviewing documents on her tablet while Zoe returned to her mystery novel. About an hour into the flight, Barbara appeared beside their row. "Ms. Wilson, we have a seat available in first class if you'd prefer to move forward." Diana looked up from her tablet. "That's very kind, Barbara, but I'm quite comfortable here with my daughter." "We could accommodate both of you," Barbara pressed. "It would be no trouble." Diana's smile remained pleasant but took on a firmness that Zoe recognized. Thank you, but no, we specifically chose to fly economy today. Barbara seemed unsure how to respond to this. Of course, please let me know if you change your mind. After she left, Zoe gave her mother a knowing look. You're making her nervous. Good, Diana said simply. It's important for our staff to understand that economy passengers deserve the same level of service and respect as first class. That's the whole point of the One Sky initiative. The flight continued without incident. Zoe noticed that the economy cabin crew became noticeably more attentive after word spread that the CEO was sitting among them. Beverage refills were offered more frequently, and the attendant seemed more engaged with all passengers, not just Diana and Zoe. About halfway through the flight, during a quiet moment when most passengers were either reading or napping, Diana's attention was caught by a commotion a few rows ahead. A young girl, perhaps 8 or 9 years old, was visibly upset, and her mother was trying to comfort her. I need to go to the bathroom, the girl said loudly enough to be heard, tears welling in her eyes. I know, sweetheart, but you need to wait, her mother replied, looking uncomfortable. The fasten seatbelt sign is on. The girl squirmed in her seat. But I can't wait, Diana stood. Excuse me, Zoe. She moved into the aisle and approached the mother and daughter. Hi there, she said gently to the girl. My name is Diana, what's yours? Lily, the girl replied, sniffling. Hi, Lily, I couldn't help overhearing. I think we can get you to the bathroom even with the seatbelt sign on. Diana looked at the mother. I'll take responsibility. The mother looked relieved. Thank you. Diana offered her hand to Lily, who took it after a moment's hesitation. Let's go. They made their way forward past rows of curious passengers. The nearest economy bathroom was occupied, so Diana continued toward first class. As they approached the dividing curtain, Barbara Collins stepped into their path. I'm sorry, but turbulence is expected. The captain has turned on the fasten seatbelt sign. I understand, Diana said calmly. But this young lady needs to use the restroom urgently. The economy lavatory is occupied and the first-class one appears to be available. Barbara's gaze flicked from Diana to Lily, who was now hopping from foot to foot in discomfort. I'm sorry, but first-class facilities are for first-class passengers only. It's company policy. She'll have to wait for the economy lavatory. Diana's expression remained pleasant, but her voice took on an edge of steel that made Barbara straighten involuntarily. Is that so? Because I don't recall authorizing such a policy, and as CEO of this airline, I think I would remember doing so. Barbara's face paled. Ms. Wilson, I didn't mean the first-class lavatory. Now, please. Without another word, Barbara stepped aside, and Diana led Lily to the first-class bathroom. While they waited for Lily to finish, Diana stood in the first-class cabin, acutely aware of the stark contrast between the spacious leather seats here and the more cramped conditions in economy. When Lily emerged looking much relieved, Diana took her hand again. Better, Lily nodded. Much better, thank you. As they made their way back to economy, Diana paused beside Barbara, who was now busying herself with the beverage cart. Barbara, I'd like to speak with you after we land. Yes, Ms. Wilson, Barbara replied, her professional mask firmly in place but a hint of apprehension in her eyes. Diana returned Lily to her seat, the girl's mother thanking her profusely. Then she made her way back to row 16, where Zoe was watching with interest. That was interesting, Zoe commented as her mother sat down. Indeed, Diana agreed, a thoughtful expression on her face. It's one thing to talk about One Sky in a corporate presentation. It's another to see firsthand how deeply ingrained these class divisions have become in our service. The rest of the flight passed without incident. As they began their descent into Chicago, Diana made some notes on her tablet, occasionally pausing to look thoughtfully around the cabin. Zoe recognized her mother's problem-solving expression. Diana was already formulating changes to implement. After landing and taxiing to the gate, Diana and Zoe remained seated as other passengers began to deplane. Diana had texted Harold to let him know they had landed safely and would be home soon. Finally, when most of the economy cabin had emptied, they collected their carry-ons and moved toward the exit. Jetway Barbara Collins was waiting, still in her perfect uniform despite the 4-hour flight. Ms. Wilson, you asked to speak with me? Yes, Barbara, but not here. Could you meet me in the crew lounge in 30 minutes? Of course, Ms. Wilson. Diana and Zoe continued through the terminal, collecting their checked luggage and making their way to the waiting car. Harold stood beside it, his face lighting up at the sight of them. Welcome home, he said warmly. I trust the surprise was well received. It was perfect, Diana assured him, giving him a quick hug. Thank you for your part in it. My pleasure entirely, Harold replied. He took their luggage and stowed it in the trunk while they settled into the backseat. Harold, Deanna said as he took his place behind the wheel, could you drop me at the terminal staff entrance? I have a meeting with a flight attendant. Zoe can go on home with you. Of course, Ms. Wilson. Mom, can I come with you? Zoe asked. I'd like to hear what Barbara has to say. Diana considered for a moment, then nodded. All right, I think that's appropriate, given that you were part of the situation that brought it to my attention. Harold dropped them at the staff entrance, where Diana used her ID to gain access. They made their way through back corridors to the crew lounge, a comfortable but not luxurious space where flight crews could rest between flights. Barbara was already there, sitting stiffly on one of the sofas. She stood immediately when Diana and Zoe entered. Ms. Wilson, thank you for meeting with me. Please sit down, Diana said, taking a seat across from her. Zoe sat beside her mother. Barbara, how long have you been with Wilson Airlines? 15 years, Ms. Wilson. So you were here before I took over as CEO? Yes, I was hired by Mr. Wilson, your husband. Diana nodded, something softening in her expression. Thomas hired you personally? Yes, ma'am. I was one of his early hires when the airline was expanding from regional to national service. Did he ever discuss with you his vision for the airline, his philosophy about service? Barbara thought for a moment. He always emphasized treating passengers with respect. He used to say that we were welcoming people into our home in the sky. That sounds like Thomas, Diana said softly. She leaned forward slightly. Barbara, I want to be direct. I observed your interaction with my daughter on yesterday's flight, and today with the young girl needing to use the lavatory. In both cases, you enforced a division between first class and economy that goes against the founding principles of this airline. Barbara's posture remained professional, but discomfort showed in her eyes. I was following what I understood to be company policy, Ms. Wilson. The policy about lavatory usage is actually quite clear, Diana said. First-class lavatories are primarily for first-class passengers, but any passenger may use them when circumstances warrant, such as when economy facilities are occupied and a passenger has an urgent need. She paused, letting that sink in. As for not recognizing my daughter or treating her with less courtesy because she was in economy, that's not a policy issue. That's a culture issue, and one that I intend to address company-wide. Barbara's cheeks flushed slightly. I apologize if I came across as discourteous, Ms. Wilson. That was never my intention. I believe you, Diana said, but intention and impact are different things. When you made that comment about economy passengers trying to sneak into first class, yes, my daughter told me about that. What message do you think that sends? Barbara looked down at her hands. That some passengers are worth more than others. Exactly, and that's not what Wilson Airlines stands for. It's not what my husband built this company to be, and it's not what I want it to be going forward. Diana's voice remained calm but carried absolute conviction. Tomorrow, I'm announcing a comprehensive review of all our service protocols and training programs. I'd like you to be part of the team leading that review. Barbara looked up in surprise. Me? Yes, you've been with this airline for 15 years. You know our service standards inside and out. And now I think you understand exactly what we need to change. Now, back to where we started. The flight attendant, Barbara Collins, stood rigid in the narrow aisle of the Boeing 747, her perfectly manicured hand gripping the back of seat 2A where 16-year-old Zoe Wilson had settled in. The cabin buzzed with the low murmur of first-class passengers watching the confrontation unfold. Barbara's lips pressed into a thin line, her blue eyes narrowing as she stared down at the young black teenager who remained perfectly calm, hands folded in her lap. I don't care who your mother is, Barbara said, her voice carrying just enough to make several passengers look up from their pre-flight routines. Your boarding pass clearly shows economy seating. This seat belongs to someone else. Zoe slowly reached into the pocket of her simple denim jacket and pulled out her phone. Would you like to speak with the CEO of Wilson Airlines yourself? I can call her right now. Barbara's face flushed as a distinguished older gentleman across the aisle leaned forward. Excuse me, he said, his voice carrying the weight of authority. Did you say Wilson, as in Diana Wilson? The tension in the cabin thickened as more passengers turned to watch. Barbara's hand trembled slightly against the leather seat. Security, she called over her shoulder, never taking her eyes off Zoe. Have a situation in first class. At that moment, Diana Wilson appeared at the front of the first-class cabin, her presence immediately commanding attention. She had boarded late, delayed by a last-minute call, and now stood taking in the scene before her, her daughter being confronted by the very flight attendant who had been working with her for the past 6 months to reform Wilson Airlines service culture. Barbara, Diana said, her voice carrying effortlessly through the cabin. Is there a problem? Barbara turned, her expression changing from stern authority to shocked recognition. "Ms. Wilson, this young woman has seated herself in first class with an economy ticket. I was just explaining that she needs to return to her assigned seat." Diana moved forward, placing a hand on Zoe's shoulder. "This is my daughter, Zoe, and yes, her original ticket was for economy, but I've upgraded her. She belongs exactly where she is." The entire cabin had gone silent, passengers watching the scene unfold with undisguised interest. Barbara seemed momentarily at a loss for words, her professional composure cracking. I had no idea," Barbara stammered. "No, you didn't," Diana agreed. "But what matters isn't who she is, but how you approached the situation." She looked around the cabin, meeting the eyes of several passengers before continuing. 6 months ago, Wilson Airlines launched our One Sky initiative, committing to treating every passenger with the same respect and dignity, regardless of what they paid for their ticket. She turned back to Barbara. "You've been instrumental in reshaping our service culture, Barbara, in helping us break down the artificial barriers between cabins. What happened here?" Barbara took a deep breath, visibly collecting herself. "I made an assumption based on appearance," she admitted. "I failed to live up to the standard we've been working to establish. I apologize, Ms. Wilson." She turned to Zoe. "And to you, Ms. Wilson, I was wrong." Diana nodded, satisfied. "We all have unconscious biases, Barbara. The important thing is recognizing them and working to overcome them." She addressed the cabin at large. "At Wilson Airlines, we believe everyone belongs in the sky, whether you're in first class, economy, or anywhere in between. Thank you all for your patience." As Diana took her seat beside Zoe, the cabin erupted in spontaneous applause. Barbara, her composure regained, continued her pre-flight duties with renewed attention to treating each passenger with equal respect. "Well," Zoe said quietly to her mother, "that was quite a teaching moment." Diana squeezed her daughter's hand. "For all of us, I think, including me." She glanced around the first-class cabin, then back toward the economy section behind the curtain. "Your father's vision was always bigger than luxury seats and premium amenities. It was about creating a place where everyone could feel they belonged." As the plane began its taxi to the runway, Diana looked out the window at the vast sky beyond. "One sky," she murmured, "big enough for everyone." Zoe said, "It's a start," Diana agreed. "Real change takes time. But if we stay true to your father's vision, to treating everyone with equal dignity and respect, I believe we can transform not just our airline, but perhaps set an example for the industry." As they pulled into the driveway of their home, Harold turned to them with a warm smile. "Welcome home, Ms. Wilson, Ms. Zoe. Dinner will be ready in 20 minutes. "Thank you, Harold," Diana said. "It's good to be home." That evening, after a delicious meal and comfortable conversation, Diana found Zoe in Thomas's study, a room that had been preserved much as he left it, with his aviation books lining the shelves and his pilot's licenses framed on the wall. Zoe was sitting at his desk, looking through an old photo album. "I thought I might find you here," Diana said softly, coming to stand beside her. "Just looking at old pictures," Zoe explained. "Dad with the first plane. You and Dad at the opening of the original terminal, the three of us at that air show in Wisconsin." Diana looked over her shoulder at the photos, memories washing over her. "He loved those small air shows, said they kept us connected to why people fall in love with flying in the first place." "The wonder of it," Zoe agreed. "That's what One Sky is really about, isn't it? Keeping the wonder accessible to everyone." Diana nodded, her hand resting gently on her daughter's shoulder. "Exactly. Your father would be so proud of who you've become, Zoe. And so am I." Zoe closed the album, rising to embrace her mother. "I love you, Mom. I love you too, sweetheart, more than all the sky." Outside the window, stars began to appear in the darkening sky, a vast canopy stretching endlessly above, covering all equally with its beauty. One sky big enough for everyone. Thank you for listening. If this story touched you, please subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments.